Thank you, Mr. Hempande. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for your comments and for setting the pace for this session. I convey my thanks to the Center of Excellence, CII, for taking the lead on sustainability. I think we can take this slide a little bit later. Yeah, thanks. And for, the genuine feedback that I get from my colleagues and people who are imparting some of the knowledge here and also taking part in the discussions is that the sessions are getting better. It's maturing, it's, mindsets are also being influenced and changing. So it's really, the reason for the summit itself is valuable, and I think we need to invest in each other in terms of our knowledge and sharing as much as we can do. We have a few minutes to talk about the aspect of circular economy. I have prepared some notes. I will start with basically some definitional issues because those are important to us, my organization certainly, but also many of people who are here and follow the same line of thinking, if not possible to do this always in practice. Circular economy was first sort of written about in the mid-80s. There's a book that was done by David Pierce and Kerry Turner, which is called Circular Economy in 1989, and the term started taking shape. Mr. Hempande is right that we never really read about this in our college and school and all that, but of late it's become, to some extent, more relevant, more spoken about, because it may be a time for the idea. The idea's time has come and we need to take it forward. And the reason for that is that if we see from an environmental and conservation point of view, the development of these ideas from a point where in 1992, the Earth Summit, which then led to the Convention of Biological Diversity, which we now call CBD, was a progression of mankind in a way that the whole world got together. All nations signed on to this to say this Convention for Biological Diversity is important for us, for our planet, and for our respective countries, and countries have to evolve policies to meet up to that. This is much more a precursor to climate change convention that was finally signed in Paris. To this, it led to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment of 2005 in a way, although it took time, but we all got those goals, we talked about it, India adopted it. My government also took charge and took initiatives in these areas. And then this led on to the what we now know as the larger sustainability development goals. But here, I don't mean that as part of the circular economy, I mean the progression in a way that the world is seeing the ecology and environment. From our point of view, from my organization's point of view, ecosystem functions have their own ways, the inimitable ways of providing ecosystem services to human society. Sometimes, and quite often, it's in the form of provisioning services like food, raw materials, genetic resources, water, minerals, medicinal resources, energy, etc. And above all, supporting services that are necessary for the production of other ecosystem services. In this sort of inner universe of our Earth, the maximum amount of practice at this point of time of this use of services, benefit of services, is undertaken largely by communities and usually by people who are on the lower end of the triangle as far as economy is concerned. So very relevant for countries such as ours, very relevant for developing economies and those who have to go much further. And in a way, perhaps even sidestep some of the mistakes that led to this issue of climate change. And therefore, this leads to the terminology of GDP of the poor in a way. I mean, that's not the entire thing as far as circular economy is concerned, but these are some of the terms that are there. Now, this is the useful, this is the point I'm trying to make of all this, is that we started on these studies which took up data in WWF for about 10 years. This is an Indian study, which then was completed on one landscape, which is called the Tarai, which is approximately 51,000 square kilometers of a landscape which runs between India and Nepal. And that study, following evaluation of ecosystem services, led us to understand that this sort of GDP of the poor, the income addition is between 65 to 125%. However, the percentage declines with increasing incomes, implying that the rich and wealthy, to a large extent, do not depend on these services as much as the poor communities do. And therefore, moving away from this concept of destroying biodiversity is essentially tantamount to destroying the well-being of the poor. So this is one major issue. However, when we recognize this in the larger social sphere, the world is moving into, we are becoming a multipolar world, even in terms of production and services that we have. The polarity is there because the genuine requirements of society have also to be met by business and industry. And since CII is an industry fora, this is an important aspect that I'd like to talk about, is that for businesses to survive, natural resources are largely required. And for sustainable management of the natural resources, like forests, wetlands, rivers, and other resources, one needs to set the right goals of conservation and environmental management, which through their natural functioning support and sustain these services. And therefore, businesses that depend on biodiversity to some extent on a supply chain, but also have customers in the first stage or the second stage, interdependent of society, which is on the poor side of the spectrum, require to take this and contain it within themselves. So that's one side of it. Maybe it's an area which is more in the social side than the other side. But what has happened in India? We have taken forward, through the guidance of thinking, our government, thinkers in society, to embrace this in a way that we have a law around the corporate sustainability goals, which is the CSR. And this has, in a way, a forerunner in the rest of the world, because it actually gives us an opportunity to use some of these thoughts in the way that we can link up much more with social requirements and social goals. In a way, then it links further forward to the concept of a circular and sustainable economy. And why is it required? This is a concept I'd like you to see just now. May I have the slide, please? This is based on a study done by the Global Footprint Network, a partner of WWF. And this just shows the dates on which, since 1977, that we have what we call the Earth Overshoot Day. This is the day in the year where we use up the year's supply of natural or renewable resources. So, you see 2017, it's basically we overshot our resources on the 2nd of August. Before that, 2007 was 15th of August and so on and so forth. The danger here is that we are globally, manufacturing generally is not on the upside. Economies are down. And once there is a global recovery in this area, the Earth Overshoot Day will then become much more acute for us. It will probably go into an earlier date of July. And this is the danger point. That none of us can survive if the overshoot is not managed. And none of us can really see this unless concepts like the circular economy are taken into account. I'll talk about three things. One is the approaching concept of the ecological revolution. From the Industrial Revolution, then the informatics, and perhaps moving towards an ecological revolution. Still concepts, still issues that people need to think about. Those of you who would like to read about this more extreme, more direct theory, please read a book called Half Earth. It's by a scientist called E.O. Wilson. You may not agree with the concept. I don't agree with it in large terms, but it leads to an extreme view, but sometimes these views are the ones that influence people and thinkers and governments to go that way. Which basically talks about the fact that in order for mankind to survive, we need to make the planet survive. Because to make the planet survive, we have to at least put aside half the earth in some way or the other, so that we preserve it in its, and nurture, regenerate, etc. So just as a matter of record, currently we preserve through the different governments of the world, the natural reserves that we've set aside, national parks, tiger reserves, etc. We are approximately 17% of the planet is currently covered. Now, how do we go from 17 to 50? That's a challenge. And there are ways to go towards it, and normally, you can't set aside large parts of the world because people are using it, and therefore you need the people on your side. And if you need people on your side, you have to create markets and you have to create consumer behavior that goes into that. So this is the larger argument. I will now quickly conclude on this because others need to talk about this. There is also a need to give certain examples. I'd give 3 examples. I've given you the valuation of Tarai, and we can take you through, some of you who are willing to do this also through field studies, how this valuation arrived at and what all do they need and what the communities actually use for this particular purpose. We are getting into a situation on the other side, which is India is going to look at electric cars in a big way. And there's an opportunity for us to use the existing resources of our automobile companies, of the existing, a lot of our vehicles will need to be refurbished, etc. Then why do you need to manufacture everything all over again? And how can we use that, although it's not entirely circular, but how we can reuse that in a way that is better than just looking at constantly making new steel and finding new sources of other panels and so on and so forth. And the other form of circular economy could be the way we capture heat for purposes of both industry as well as for home consumption. And therefore, these are some of the examples that we can set in, more than just the supply chain methodologies. We can talk a bit more about it, also in sectors such as real estate. Thank you. I think we'll get some more time to discuss between ourselves in the question answer session. But my request to you is that while we need to look at economies as a whole, we also need to look at societies and social contracts, which then lead us to thinking about larger environments, and then it leads to what we are, in a fora like this, at market impacts, and need to make products and markets and products that will move into markets which are created by this kind of an ecosystem. Thank you.